President Donald Trump has ordered military troops to be deployed to Portland, Oregon, and he declared that he is authorizing the use of full force if necessary to fight crime and restore order, a statement that has already drawn sharp attention from allies and critics alike and has fueled a debate about the limits of federal power inside American cities. The move, announced in a statement that quickly made waves across political and media circles, comes at a time when the administration has increasingly emphasized law and order as a central message, portraying rising crime and civil unrest in major cities as a threat to national stability and insisting that strong intervention is not only justified but also essential. In his comments, Trump suggested that the deployment would not be limited to Portland alone, pointing to recent National Guard activity in other American cities, including Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Memphis. While the Post was not explicit in specifying whether the forces sent to Portland would be drawn from the National Guard or from regular military units, the language of full force authorization suggested a readiness to push beyond symbolic gestures and to take a firm stance in urban areas where unrest or spikes in violent crime have been reported. This ambiguity has left room for speculation, with some observers noting that the use of regular military on American soil raises serious constitutional and legal questions under the Posse Comitatus Act, while others argue that the National Guard, when federalized, can be directed by the president with relatively fewer hurdles. The city of Portland has, for years, been a flashpoint in debates over protests, policing, and federal authority. The city saw some of the nation's most sustained demonstrations in recent years, often fueled by clashes between protesters advocating social justice reforms and law enforcement agencies accused of excessive force. Trump has repeatedly highlighted Portland as an example of what he describes as failed democratic leadership, accusing local officials of being too lenient and ineffective in the face of crime and disorder. His decision to escalate federal involvement there fits into a broader narrative he has sought to build, portraying himself as the ultimate defender of safety, stability, and traditional values against what he characterizes as chaos promoted or tolerated by his political opponents. Critics of the move have been swift to respond, warning that deploying troops to a major American city risks inflaming tensions rather than calming them. Civil rights groups, constitutional scholars, and political leaders from across the aisle have voiced concern that bringing in federal forces with a mandate to use full force creates a scenario where confrontation is not only possible but likely. The American Civil Liberties Union released a statement arguing that such actions threaten the rights of citizens to protest and to assemble peacefully, while Democratic lawmakers in Oregon signaled they would challenge any federal deployment that appears to bypass state authority. At the same time, supporters of the president have applauded the measure, insisting that rising crime cannot be ignored and that federal intervention is a legitimate response when local governments fail to protect residents. The mention of Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Memphis as recent sites of National Guard deployments underscores the broader context in which this order comes. Each of those cities has grappled with different forms of unrest, from protests that spilled into violent clashes to spikes in violent crime that overwhelmed local police resources. By tying Portland to this list, Trump is effectively framing the issue not as an isolated problem but as part of a nationwide challenge that, in his view, justifies extraordinary measures. His rhetoric about full force resonates strongly with his core supporters, who have consistently rated law and order as a top concern, but it also raises fears among opponents who see echoes of authoritarian tendencies in the willingness to send troops into cities without clear local consent. The timing of this announcement is also notable. With the United Nations General Assembly recently concluded and with global attention focused on international conflicts and shifting alliances, Trump has turned the domestic spotlight back onto crime and urban unrest. The juxtaposition of international diplomacy with a tough domestic stance serves to reinforce his image as a leader willing to be assertive both abroad and at home. His critics argue, however, that this is more political theater than practical solution, designed to energize his base and distract from other pressing issues, such as economic uncertainty and debates over healthcare and immigration policy. Reactions from Portland itself have been mixed but largely skeptical of the federal plan. Local leaders have repeatedly expressed their desire to manage city affairs without outside interference, emphasizing community-based strategies and long-term reforms rather than military-style crackdowns. Oregon's governor has previously clashed with the Trump administration over federal deployments, and early indications suggest that this new order will only deepen those divisions. Some community groups in Portland fear that the presence of troops will turn the city into a stage for escalating confrontations, especially given the history of tense standoffs between protesters and law enforcement. Beyond the immediate impact in Portland, the president's decision raises broader questions about the balance of power between federal and local governments. Legal analysts point out that while the Insurrection Act provides some avenues for federal deployment of troops in exceptional circumstances, the bar for invoking such authority is high, and the circumstances must typically involve a breakdown of law and order so severe that local authorities are unable or unwilling to cope. Whether the situation in Portland meets that threshold is likely to become a central point of contention, and any attempt to stretch the legal justification could face challenges in court. Meanwhile, voices from within the law enforcement community are divided. Some police officials have welcomed the idea of additional support, noting that local departments often face resource shortages and that National Guard units can provide valuable assistance in maintaining order. Others, however, have warned that mixing military forces into civilian law enforcement environments carries significant risks, both in terms of escalating violence and in eroding public trust. The sight of uniformed soldiers patrolling city streets is a powerful image, one that can either reassure or alarm citizens depending on their perspectives, and the memory of past clashes between federal officers and demonstrators in Portland remains fresh. Trump's broader messaging around the issue has emphasized strength, deterrence, and the need to send a clear signal that lawlessness will not be tolerated. His language about full force is deliberately uncompromising, designed to convey resolve and to leave no room for doubt about his willingness to act decisively. Yet opponents argue that such rhetoric leaves little space for de-escalation, dialogue, or community-based solutions. They warn that framing the issue in stark, militarized terms risks alienating large segments of the population who already feel marginalized by aggressive policing. The political stakes of this move cannot be overlooked. With national elections on the horizon and with public opinion sharply divided along partisan lines, Trump's order to deploy troops to Portland serves as both a policy measure and a political statement. For supporters, it demonstrates decisive leadership and a willingness to confront difficult problems head-on. For critics, it exemplifies an overreach of executive power and a disregard for constitutional norms. The battle over how this action is perceived will likely play out not only in Portland's streets but also in the broader national discourse, shaping debates on security, freedom, and the role of government. As the situation unfolds, attention will also turn to how local residents respond. Portland has a history of strong civic engagement and vocal activism, and the arrival of federal troops is unlikely to go unnoticed or unchallenged. Protests, counter-protests, and public demonstrations may well follow, creating a volatile environment in which even small sparks could ignite larger confrontations. City officials are already urging calm and calling for dialogue, but the effectiveness of those appeals remains uncertain in a climate of heightened tension and deep mistrust. International observers are watching closely as well, noting that the deployment of troops inside American cities sends a message not only domestically but also abroad. Allies and adversaries alike see in this decision a reflection of America's internal struggles, and some foreign commentators have pointed to the irony of the United States, long a promoter of democratic values and civilian governance, turning to military force to address urban unrest. This international dimension adds another layer of complexity to the situation, reminding policymakers that domestic actions often reverberate beyond national borders. In the days ahead, the practical realities of the deployment will come into sharper focus. Will the troops be National Guard units operating under federal orders, or will they include regular military personnel, a step that would mark a significant escalation? How will the chain of command be structured, and what rules of engagement will govern the actions of deployed forces? These questions remain unanswered, and their resolution will shape both the effectiveness and the legality of the operation. At the same time, the broader debate over crime, protest, and public safety will continue. Supporters of a strong federal role argue that the scale of the problem demands bold solutions and that leaving cities to struggle alone is irresponsible. Opponents counter that heavy-handed intervention risks undermining democratic norms and eroding civil liberties. Between these two poles lies a complex reality in which issues of crime, inequality, protest, and governance intersect in ways that defy simple answers. For now, what is clear is that President Trump has chosen to make Portland a focal point in his campaign to assert federal authority and to champion law and order. His promise to authorize full force if necessary underscores the seriousness with which he views the challenge, but it also highlights the risks inherent in escalating conflicts on American soil. Whether this decision ultimately restores order or deepens divisions remains to be seen, but it will undoubtedly shape the national conversation for weeks and months to come.